The morning sun slid through the glass facade of the Wellington Palace Hotel, spilling gold over its polished marble floors, as Harrison adjusted his tie for the fourth time in as many minutes. The general manager had barely slept, running over his lines for the upcoming meeting with Mr. Jiang, China's elusive hospitality magnate, whose rumored fortune had entire boardrooms trembling. In theory, everything was perfect. The conference room gleamed, the coffee was imported from a single hillside in Colombia, and the AI-driven translation headset had been calibrated to capture even the subtlest tones of Mandarin. In practice, though, Harrison's hands shook as he rehearsed his welcome speech. He had always trusted numbers more than words, and the idea of relying on technology to navigate a billionaire's mother tongue felt like balancing on a tightrope in a windstorm. Olivia Thomas, in her crisp black housekeeping uniform, stood quietly at the far end of the hallway outside the meeting room, polishing the silver handles of the service cart. Her eyes weren't on the handles. They were on Harrison, pacing like a man waiting for a dental extraction. She knew this wasn't just any meeting. The whispers had been everywhere in the staff lounge. If Mr. Jiang purchased the Wellington, the place could vault into the ranks of the world's most exclusive hotel brands. Olivia's own role in this dance. Invisible, as always. She had degrees hanging in her small apartment. International Relations from Georgetown, East Asian Linguistics from Peking University, and an MBA from Wharton. But here, she was the one folding towels and clearing breakfast trays. It was easier not to explain. People rarely asked anyway. The entourage arrived precisely at 9 a.m., 4 black sedans sliding up to the curb, doors opening in sync like a choreographed ballet. Mr. Jiang emerged first, immaculately dressed, flanked by aides who moved with quiet efficiency. They filed into the boardroom, and Harrison, wearing the headset like a crown of false confidence, launched into his greeting. "Welcome, Mr. Jiang. We are honored." The headset's synthetic voice stuttered, glitched, and spat out a garbled phrase in Mandarin that made one of the aides blink twice, lips twitching. Olivia caught the reaction instantly. The AI had misread tone. What Harrison meant as honored had landed somewhere closer to reluctant. Not exactly the sentiment you wanted when billions were at stake. The meeting rolled on, each exchange wobbling like a bicycle on ice. Harrison outlined the hotel's revenue streams, the translation lagging half a sentence behind, twisting technical terms into phrases that sounded faintly ridiculous in Mandarin. Mr. Jiang's brow furrowed deeper with every slide. "He thinks you're overestimating occupancy projections," Olivia realized silently, catching the muttered comment one aide made to another. The numbers on the screen might as well have been in hieroglyphs. Without cultural context, they were just noise. Harrison's anxiety spread through the room like static. He laughed at the wrong moments, nodded when he should have clarified, and leaned on jargon that the headset mangled into something almost poetic but utterly unhelpful. One particularly painful exchange came when he tried to describe the Wellington's heritage charm as a selling point. The translation emerged as old-fashioned stubbornness, prompting Mr. Jiang to raise an eyebrow, so sharp it could have cut glass. A bead of sweat rolled down Harrison's temple. Outside the circle of suited executives, Olivia moved silently, refilling water glasses, gathering used plates. Each step brought her closer to the conversation, and each sentence in Mandarin etched itself into her mind with increasing urgency. She wasn't just hearing words, she was hearing what was unsaid. The investor's concern about cultural adaptation, his wariness over Western hospitality models in an Eastern market, his subtle tests to gauge whether the Wellington's leadership understood the nuances of Chinese luxury travel expectations. The breaking point came when Harrison, desperate to regain control, gestured to the headset and said, "Please tell him we're committed to bridging any cultural gap." The headset hesitated, then spat out a phrase Olivia knew meant, "We hope to fill the gap eventually." The room froze. Mr. Jiang's lips pressed into a thin line. His lead aide exchanged a look with another, one of those quick, imperceptible glances that said, "We're done here." Harrison didn't see it. He launched into a long-winded explanation about the spa's renovation plans, his voice growing hoarse. Olivia felt a tightness in her chest. It wasn't just frustration, it was the absurdity of watching opportunity evaporate when she could fix it with 3 sentences. She thought of all the times she had bitten her tongue in this building, choosing invisibility over confrontation. But this wasn't about her pride anymore. This was about the hotel, the staff whose jobs might depend on this deal, and yes, maybe about proving a point to herself, that her skills were worth something in the light, not just in the shadows. She took one slow breath, steadying her hands. If she stepped forward, there was no going back. She'd be breaking the unwritten rule of her station. Housekeepers stayed silent in boardrooms. But rules were only rules until someone decided they weren't. And Olivia Thomas, quietly fluent in 4 languages and dangerously tired of being underestimated, was ready to decide. Olivia slid her polishing cloth into her pocket, the soft cotton pressing against her palm like a reminder to keep steady. She took one step forward, then another, until she stood just inside the circle of light cast by the conference table's pendant lamp. Harrison didn't notice her at first. His gaze was locked on the slides, his voice cracking under the weight of his own pitch. But Mr. Zhang's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, flicked toward her, registering the black housekeeping uniform, the name tag that read Olivia, and the calm, deliberate way she stood. "Mr. Harrison," she said gently, her voice steady enough to make a couple of aides turn. "If I may." Harrison whipped around, startled, his lips parting to speak, but she didn't give him the chance to wave her away. She switched to Mandarin, the words flowing smooth and warm, like water over polished stones. "Mr. Zhang," she began. "He means to say the Wellington honors not just the idea of heritage, but the responsibility it carries. To respect traditions while creating something timeless for the future." The change was immediate. The billionaire's expression softened almost imperceptibly, but enough that Olivia caught it. His aides leaned in, their pens pausing mid-note. She hadn't just translated. She'd reframed the sentiment in a way that resonated with his worldview. Harrison blinked rapidly, headset dangling uselessly around his neck now, caught between relief and the faint sting of being upstaged. Mr. Zhang responded in Mandarin, his tone testing yet curious. "And what is timeless, in your view?" he asked. Olivia smiled, not too broadly, just enough to show she was ready for the question. "Timeless," she said, "is when a place speaks to your spirit before you've even crossed the threshold. It's not the age of the building, but the way it understands the guest, what they need before they know to ask. In Chinese, we might call it ikuweibun. The guest is the root." The phrase landed like a pebble in a still pond, rippling outward. One of the aides nodded, jotting it down. Harrison, though silent, was beginning to realize this wasn't just language skill. This was cultural fluency, the kind you couldn't buy in a software package. The meeting shifted gears entirely. Instead of struggling through half-garbled explanations, Olivia and Mr. Zhang began an exchange that was as much about values as it was about business. She fielded his questions about regional expansion, not with grandiose promises, but with pragmatic, data-backed insights drawn from her studies and time living in Beijing and Shanghai. When he raised concerns about staff training for Chinese high-net-worth travelers, she outlined strategies that blended Western service precision with Eastern concepts of honor and discretion. It wasn't all solemn diplomacy, either. At one point, when the coffee service returned to the table, Mr. Zhang glanced at the cups and said something dry about coffee that costs more than my first car. Olivia chuckled and replied in Mandarin, "And I bet your first car was already nicer than my first apartment." The room laughed, a real laugh, not the polite, nervous kind, and the tension cracked open like an overripe fruit. Even Harrison smiled, though it was the smile of a man both grateful and slightly humbled. By the halfway mark, Olivia was no longer standing at the edge of the table. She was seated at it, scribbling notes in neat columns, translating and interpreting not just words but intent. When Mr. Zhang challenged the hotel's occupancy projections, she reframed them within the context of seasonal Chinese travel trends, even suggesting specific partnership opportunities with luxury tour operators in Guangzhou. Harrison, to his credit, adapted quickly, handing her printouts, deferring to her judgment on certain cultural references, and beginning to see that she wasn't here to humiliate him. She was here to save the deal. Then came the moment that would later be replayed in every whispered staff room retelling. Mr. Zhang, after a long silence, said in Mandarin, "It surprises me that your director of international relations is also clearing plates. The pause in the room was palpable. Olivia met his gaze squarely. "It surprises me too," she said lightly, though her tone carried an edge. "But perhaps it's not the title that matters, but whether one is in the right place when needed." The aides exchanged knowing glances. Harrison cleared his throat, an awkward mix of embarrassment and dawning awareness. For years, the Wellington had been a fortress of traditional hierarchy. Managers managed, staff served, and the invisible stayed invisible. But here, in real time, that fortress had sprouted a door. And Olivia had walked through it without asking for permission. The rest of the meeting felt almost easy. Mr. Zhang laid out his expectations for cultural integration, Olivia mapped each point to actionable strategies, and Harrison nodded along, occasionally contributing details about the hotel's infrastructure and budget. The translation headset sat abandoned on the table, a silent reminder of what had almost cost them the deal. As the meeting wrapped, Mr. Zhang stood and extended his hand to Olivia first. "You've given me clarity," he said in Mandarin. "Clarity is more valuable than contracts." She bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement. "And clarity," she replied, "is only possible when people choose to see what's right in front of them." She felt Harrison's eyes on her as the entourage left, their footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. He didn't speak, not yet, but in the silence, Olivia sensed the shift. Something had cracked open in the Wellington's polished facade, and light was finally streaming through. Harrison caught up with her in the staff corridor 10 minutes later, after the last of Mr. Zhang's entourage had been escorted to their limousines. The hall smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh linens, a familiar scent for Olivia, though everything about this moment felt unfamiliar. Harrison's voice was lower than usual, stripped of the booming cheerfulness he wore like a badge in front of investors. "Olivia," he began, almost hesitant, I don't think I need to tell you what just happened in there." She kept walking toward the housekeeping closet, pushing her cart, the wheels squeaking on the tile. "You mean how the translation headset nearly turned heritage charm into an insult?" she said lightly. His laugh was short, more exhale than amusement. "I mean how you saved the meeting." He stopped, and she stopped too, turning to face him. For a second, neither spoke. It was the first time in years she'd seen his gaze hold a mix of humility and curiosity instead of polite dismissal. "I didn't do it for you," she said, not unkindly. "I did it for the Wellington, and for everyone working here who needs this place to stay alive." Harrison nodded, as if accepting a verdict he'd known was coming. "Still," he said, "you shouldn't be folding towels with that kind of skill set. I need to talk to you, properly. My office. Tomorrow morning." He glanced at the cart. "Leave this. I'll have someone cover your shift." The next morning, Olivia walked into Harrison's office, not the boardroom with its intimidating glass table, but a smaller space lined with neatly stacked files and the faint scent of roasted coffee. He motioned for her to sit. "I looked at your personnel file last night," he said. "It's bare. No mention of your education. No mention of your languages. Just housekeeping, full-time." "That's because no one asked," Olivia replied. "I gave my resume to HR when I applied, but the woman there told me I was overqualified and that positions above entry level were filled internally." She shrugged. "So I took the job I could get." Harrison tapped his pen against the desk. "Well, I'm filling a position internally right now. Director of International Guest Relations. You'll start next week." The words landed so suddenly that Olivia felt a beat of disbelief before her heart caught up. "That's a big leap from cleaning suites," she said slowly. "And a big change for this hotel." He smiled faintly. "After yesterday, I think we could use a few big changes." Her first day in the new role was a mixture of exhilaration and quiet skepticism from others. Some managers congratulated her warmly. Others watched her as though waiting for her to trip. Olivia met each gaze with the same calm professionalism she had brought to polishing silver. She spent her first week shadowing front desk operations, listening in on concierge calls, and asking questions about the hotel's current strategies for foreign guests. What she found was exactly what she had suspected: good intentions wrapped in outdated practices. One evening, she walked through the lobby and overheard a French couple struggling to explain to a bellhop that their room service order had arrived cold. The bellhop, clearly uncomfortable, simply kept nodding and repeating, "One moment, please." Olivia stepped in, switching effortlessly to French. smoothing the conversation until the couple was smiling again. By the time she returned to her desk, she had decided on her first initiative, a program she would call Hidden Talents. It started with a simple memo to all staff, inviting anyone, housekeeping, kitchen, maintenance, security, to share skills that weren't part of their job description. Within days, her inbox overflowed. A dishwasher who played the piano at concert level. A security guard who spoke fluent Arabic and had worked in tourism in Dubai. A night cleaner who was also a certified sommelier. Olivia met each one personally, taking careful notes, her mind sparking with ways these talents could be woven into the guest experience. When she pitched the program to Harrison and the executive committee, she spoke plainly. "We've been sitting on a gold mine of ability," she told them. "We keep hiring outside consultants when our own people have the skills we need. Recognizing that doesn't just improve service, it builds loyalty. It shows we see our staff as whole people, not just uniforms." There was resistance, of course. Some department heads worried about breaking hierarchy. Others feared that giving staff more visibility would create unrest. But Olivia, drawing on every negotiation skill she had ever studied, found ways to address each concern. "We're not dismantling roles," she explained. "We're enhancing them. The world's best hotels don't just serve guests, they surprise them. And nothing surprises a guest more than discovering the man fixing the elevator can recommend the best street food in Taipei, in perfect Mandarin." Slowly, the tide turned. Harrison approved a pilot program for 3 months, focusing on guests from high-growth markets like China, the Middle East, and Brazil. Olivia personally trained participating staff on cultural etiquette and communication basics in relevant languages. She even ran workshops on reading between the lines for international guests, explaining, for example, how a guest declining assistance twice might actually be politely asking for it. The first breakthrough came sooner than expected. A Saudi family staying in the presidential suite requested a last-minute birthday surprise for their matriarch. The hotel florist was already closed, but the night cleaner, Olivia's sommelier, offered to assemble a display of exotic fruits and teas from the kitchen stores, explaining their cultural significance in Arabic to the family. The next day, the patriarch left a note for management, praising the most thoughtful hospitality I have experienced outside my country. Harrison forwarded the note to the board with a single line. "This is what happens when we use all our resources." Word of the changes spread beyond the Wellington. Travel bloggers began mentioning the unexpectedly personal touches of their stays. A Chinese social media influencer posted a video of a housekeeper greeting her in flawless Mandarin, explaining the history of a local tea served in her room. Bookings from those markets began to tick upward. Olivia's days grew long, but deeply satisfying. She rotated between meetings with marketing teams, language practice sessions with staff, and late-night walks through the quiet corridors of the hotel, where she still greeted housekeeping crews like old friends. Sometimes she caught herself polishing a stray silver handle out of habit, smiling at the muscle memory. One evening, weeks into the program, she received a call from Mr. Zhang's assistant. The billionaire wanted to host a private dinner at the Wellington to celebrate the signing of the acquisition deal. "He specifically requested you attend," the assistant added. At the dinner, set in one of the Wellington's most opulent suites, Mr. Zhang greeted her warmly. "I hear you have been reorganizing things," he said, eyes twinkling. "Not reorganizing," Olivia replied with a smile. "Just making sure the right voices are heard." He raised his glass to voices that changed the room. By the time the Hidden Talents initiative completed its pilot phase, the numbers spoke as loudly as the anecdotes. Guest satisfaction scores had risen sharply among international travelers. Repeat bookings from targeted markets were up by 17%. Staff turnover dropped, and internal promotions increased by nearly a third. Harrison, once wary, became one of Olivia's biggest advocates, even crediting her in an industry conference speech about innovation in hospitality. But the most meaningful changes were quieter. A young bellhop studying Portuguese on his phone between shifts. The security guard teaching a concierge how to write guests' names in Arabic script. The dishwasher, now performing piano pieces in the lobby during evening tea service, drawing small crowds of guests who lingered to listen. Olivia knew her journey wasn't typical. Most people in her position didn't get the moment in the boardroom, the chance to speak up. She also knew she had taken a risk, one that could easily have backfired if Mr. Jiang had seen her intervention as inappropriate. But she had trusted her instincts, her training, and her belief that sometimes the right thing. Passed by the now dusty translation headset in the AV storage room. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands, and laughed softly. It was a reminder of how close the Wellington had come to missing its chance. She set it back down, thinking of all the translation headsets people carried. Not just machines, but assumptions, hierarchies, and blind spots that muffled the truth of what people could do. As she walked out into the lobby, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, she spotted a new housekeeping recruit greeting a Japanese guest with a bow and a warm exchange in Japanese. Olivia felt that familiar swell in her chest. Not pride in herself, but pride in the culture that was taking root. The Wellington wasn't just surviving, it was transforming. And so was she. Sometimes, the most powerful changes begin when someone dares to speak from the margins. Olivia's leap from invisibility to leadership wasn't luck. It was the meeting of preparation and opportunity, the courage to stand in the light when the moment came. If you've ever felt unseen, remember, your value isn't measured by your title, and your skills can be the bridge someone desperately needs. So trust your readiness, speak when it matters, and help others be seen too. You've got this. If you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, and comment the lesson you took away. Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.